coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming.
Excuse me, on the left over here, we have individuals who are religious fundamentalists, religious fanatics, and this is the expression, RT-PCR, real-time PCR expression of the VMAT2 gene. Over here, we have individuals. So let me complete. So over here, we have individuals who are not particularly fundamentalists, not particularly religious, and you can see there's a much reduced expression of this particular gene, the VMAT2 gene. Another evidence that supports our hypothesis for the development of this approach.
What you're suggesting here is by spreading this virus, we're going to eliminate individuals from donning on a bomb vest and going into a market and blowing up the market.
So our hypothesis is that these are fanatical people, that they have overexpression of the VMAT2 gene, and that by vaccinating them against this, we'll eliminate this behavior. So we have some very, very remarkable data in this next slide. Here we have two brain scans. These are fMRIs. These are two different individuals with different levels of expression of VMAT2. On top is an individual who's a religious fanatic, an individual, and we've repeated this numerous times, that has high levels of VMAT2. Now, this individual down here who had low levels of the VMAT2 gene, this individual would self-describe as not particularly religious. In each case, these individuals were read a religious text. This individual lit up the right middle frontal gyrus, shown here, and that's a part of the brain that's associated with theory of mind. It's a part of the brain that has to do with intents and beliefs and desires. In marked contrast, here's an individual who would not particularly self-describe as religious, and when they're read a religious text, what you see is that this part of the brain called the anterior insula lights up. This is a part of the brain that's associated with disgust or displeasure on hearing something.
So you're suggesting I take a CT scan with me when I'm evaluating people to determine whether I put a bullet in their head?
So the data that I'm presenting here supports the concept that we're proposing, and I think that we would not propose to do CT scans or fMRIs on individuals out in the hinterlands of Afghanistan. The virus would immunize against this VMAT2 gene, and that would have the effect that you see here, which is it's essentially to turn a fanatic into a normal person. And we think that will have major effects in the Middle East.
How would you suggest that this is going to be dispersed? The aerosol?
Well, so the present plan and the tests that we've done so far have used respiratory viruses, such as flu or rhinoviruses, and we believe that that's a satisfactory way to get the exposure of the largest part of the population. Most of us, of course, have been exposed to both of those viruses, and we're quite confident that this will be a very successful approach.
This is fascinating. What's the name of this proposal?
Yeah, so the name of this project is FunVax, which is the vaccine for religious fundamentalism.
And you have a proposal already?
The proposal has just been submitted, and I think that the data that I have shown you today would support the development of this project, and we think it has great promise.
As you all are aware, the FDA approved full licensure of the Pfizer vaccine this morning. And as also I'm sure you're aware, back in August on the 9th, the Secretary articulated that it was his intent to mandate the COVID-19 vaccines upon FDA licensure or by mid-September to seek a waiver from the President. So now that the Pfizer vaccine has been approved, the Department is prepared to issue updated guidance requiring all service members to be vaccinated. A timeline for vaccination completion will be provided in the coming days. The health of the force is, as always, of our military and our civilian employees, families, and communities is a top priority. So it's important to remind everyone that these efforts ensure the safety of our service members and promote the readiness of our force, not to mention the health and safety of the communities around the country in which we live. And you can consider this memo today as what we would call in the military a warning order.
The Pentagon on Monday said that it will seek U.S. President Joe Biden's approval by mid-September to require 1.3 million military members to get vaccinated against COVID-19, anticipating full regulatory clearance for a vaccine by then. After setting COVID-19 rules for federal workers, Biden last month directed the Pentagon to look into how and when it will require members of the military to take the vaccine. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby called Monday's memo issued by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin a warning order.
This is coming, and we want you to be ready for it as well. And obviously, we prefer that that you get the vaccine now and not wait for the mandate.
The Defense Department is targeting mid-September for a vaccination deadline based on expectations for the Food and Drug Administration to give full approval to the Pfizer vaccine. Currently, it falls under an emergency use authorization. The deadline could be moved up if the FDA approves the vaccine earlier, the Secretary said in the memo. Austin said that he could act even sooner or recommend a different course if the situation worsened. The U.S. military says around half of the armed forces have had their shots. Rates are highest in the Navy, which suffered from a high-profile outbreak last year aboard an aircraft carrier. Biden threw his support behind the move, saying the Delta variant is spreading rapidly through unvaccinated populations, adding, quote, "We are still on a wartime footing, and every American who is eligible should take immediate steps to get vaccinated right away."
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. The U.S. is now averaging roughly 100,000 new coronavirus cases per day. That's pushing the Pentagon to require all military members to get vaccinated. They're aiming to mandate vaccines by mid-September.
We're seeing an uptick in cases, uptick in hospitalizations across the force, as we are in the country, and the Delta variant is a factor in that. So we're going to watch it closely. And as the Secretary told the force today, if he needs to act sooner than this timeline, then he'll do that.
Plus, the Senate is poised to hold a final vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill by Tuesday. On Sunday, nearly 70 senators voted to end debate on the $1 trillion package. One Republican, Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, voted against advancing the bill. Without unanimous support, the measure is subject to 30 hours of debate. It's yet to be seen whether Republicans will use all of their remaining time to allow the bill to move forward. We'll have more on the uphill battle it faces next in the House. But first, Senate Democrats unveiled the outline of a $3.5 trillion budget resolution. It includes sweeping spending proposals for health care, child care, education, and climate change. Notably absent is a proposal to address government financing. On Monday, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said once again that Republicans will not support a debt ceiling hike without first agreeing to spending cuts.
Now, I understand the administration sent out the Treasury Secretary to argue that historically both parties have addressed the debt ceiling together. Of course, it's our Senate Democrat colleagues who have no interest in what is historically normal. Their borrowing and spending are historically abnormal. Democrats keep boasting about how wild and revolutionary their partisan vision is. So our friends across the aisle should not expect traditional bipartisan borrowing to finance their non-traditional reckless taxing and spending spree. That's not how it's going to work.
Plus, lawmakers in New York are moving forward with an impeachment investigation against Governor Andrew Cuomo. It follows a damning report detailing allegations he sexually harassed multiple women. Top Cuomo advisor Melissa DeRosa resigned Sunday night. We'll have more on that later. Right now, let's bring in Nancy Cordes, Zeke Miller, and Nicholas Wu. Nancy is CBS News chief White House correspondent. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Nicholas is a congressional reporter for Politico. Nancy, let me start with you. Tell us a bit more about the vaccine mandate here at the Pentagon. Do we know what happens if service members don't comply, and why does the president have to sign off on this? I suppose he is commander-in-chief.
That's right. And because this vaccine does not yet, Elaine, have full FDA approval, the president has to provide a waiver to move this vaccine from voluntary to mandatory within the military. Now, that may be a moot point soon because we keep hearing that the Pfizer vaccine, at least, could be fully approved by the FDA perhaps as early as next month. But in the meantime, the White House has always said as soon as they get the recommendation from the Secretary of Defense that he thinks that this should be implemented military-wide, then President Biden will provide that waiver. So it's only a matter of time before that happens.
Nancy, I want to turn to what's happening in the states. You know, this battle over public health measures like masking are really playing out very vigorously on the state level. Who ultimately gets to decide the quote-unquote correct response to each state's individual surge?
Well, every state gets to make that decision for itself. Obviously, the CDC and public health officials at the national level look at all the data as it comes in. They issue guidelines. When the data changes, they issue new guidelines. But states are not under any obligation to take that guidance and implement it. And that's obviously caused an incredible amount of frustration at the federal level, at the White House in particular, where I talk to officials every day who say, by and large, governors are following the advice of the CDC. But of course, there are a handful of Republican governors who aren't. And they argue that is detrimental to the people of those states, particularly when you have governors trying to override, for instance, what local counties or school districts are doing to try to keep kids safe for the back-to-school season, trying to implement mask mandates and then being told by the governors that they can't. So that is where the friction is right now. Obviously, you can have all the experts at the national level saying whatever they want, but if governors at the state level choose not to follow those recommendations, there isn't that much the federal government can do.
Well, Nicholas, let's turn to infrastructure and let's talk about the next steps here. Moderates are calling on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to bring it to a vote as soon as it passes the Senate. Why is she unlikely to do that?
This is part of the two-track strategy that Democrats have talked about this whole time for both this big social spending bill and the bipartisan infrastructure plan. In order to get them through, both of them have to move basically along the same timeline. And this is the only way that Speaker Pelosi has been able to get progressives in the House on board with this bipartisan bill, which they say is too small and doesn't address the priorities on climate, for example, that they really want in there.
Well, Zeke, on Monday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen penned a letter urging Congress to pass a debt ceiling increase through regular order, not via reconciliation. Why is the Biden administration suggesting that route when they could just pass it without any need for Republican support?
You know, there are two rationales behind this. One is they don't want the political fallout themselves. They won't want to be tagged the way that as just sort of the party of taxing and spending, like we heard Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell outline in that clip that you played at the top of the segment here. There's that element to it where they want to avoid the political downside. The other is they don't want to set a precedent for how this should go how this should work going forward. We've seen the debt ceiling be used over the last decade in particular as a cudgel by both parties, largely by Republicans, against Democrats, as an attempt to sort of hold the line against spending as it pushed in order to get some sorts of spending cuts, particularly when Democrats are in power. The White House is, and the Biden administration as a whole is very wary of setting a precedent here for how this can work going forward. And essentially, in their view, they would be caving to Republican efforts to hold the debt ceiling hostage for policy aims or political aims. So they would like to sort of have it happen over regular order and essentially, make it force it to be a bipartisan vote. So both parties would be coming together to make sure that the U.S. government doesn't default on its debt.
Well, Nicholas, on the debt ceiling, if they proceed through regular order, Democrats would need 60 votes to overcome a Republican filibuster. Are there 10 GOP votes on this?
Oh, order. I mean, it really remains to be seen how exactly that vote would play out. But as Minority Leader McConnell warned on the floor, and as we've been hearing from other Senate Republicans, it doesn't seem like there are all that many who would vote to raise the debt ceiling. So, this is part of the strategy the Democrats are trying to use here, though. They are trying to jam Republicans on this vote by putting it through this kind of regular order and trying to attach it to other must-pass legislation, say government funding, which also runs out at the end of September, instead of putting it in this reconciliation bill, which would only require a simple majority, and you could pass with solely Democratic votes.
All right, switching gears, Nancy, on Monday, President Biden applauded the DOJ's recent authorization to review documents related to the 9/11 terror attacks. What more can you tell us about that?
So this comes in the wake of a pretty scathing letter from families of 9/11 victims last week who said that if President Biden doesn't fulfill a campaign promise that he made to make sure that some of these classified documents having to do with the 9/11 investigation are unclassified, then they don't want him to participate in 9/11 anniversary ceremonies. Obviously, the 20th anniversary of 9/11 coming up just next month. The reason that they want to see these documents so badly is because they have long argued that they think there are clues in those documents that would show that Saudi Arabian officials were involved in the plot somehow or involved in cleaning it up. And so they say that the only way that they'll get this proof, the only way they can get the closure is to take a look at these investigatory documents that have been under lock and key for some 20 years now. The Department of Justice just issued a new filing saying that now that some of the cases of the 9/11 hijackers have closed, it actually is going to go back and take a look at some of this investigatory material and see if it can declassify more of the information. And that's what the president then applauded today. But we're already hearing from some family members of victims who say that all sounds great, but guess what? DOJ has had this material for 20 years. They don't need to now go back and do this long, exhaustive review of the documents to see whether they can release them. They already know what's in those documents. They could go ahead and release the information right away. So this saga is going to continue.
Yeah, just weeks away here from the 20th anniversary of 9/11. All right, Zeke, I also want to ask you about former Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen. He is a key witness in multiple investigations into former President Trump's efforts to undermine the 2020 election. What sparked these investigations, and what do we know about the meetings he had over the weekend with the DOJ and members of Congress?
This really, these investigations really came out of news reports about some of the actions and conversations that were taking place between the White House and the Justice Department, efforts by the former administration, the Trump administration, to pressure the officials at the Department of Justice to try to go along with former President Trump's efforts to overturn the outcome of the 2020 general election. We saw a lot of that take place in public, but sort of in the last several weeks, there's been sort of a steady drumbeat of news reports with additional information about just the lengths to which President Trump and some of the people around him, the former president, to try to pressure the official levers of government, to try to wield them to his own political advantage. We know that the former acting attorney general, Jeffrey Rosen, met with congressional investigators for some 5 or 6 hours over the weekend, as did his then acting deputy. That their testimony, we're told, is fairly colorful.
On that note, we will continue to monitor what happens with that story. Nancy Cordes, Zeke Miller, and Nicholas Wu, thank you all very much.